So before we get too involved with writing scripts and writing longer and longer files to import and analyze and plot data, we're going to spend a little bit of time in this podcast just introducing some good practice for computer hygiene and for different alternative ways of working with scripts. Basically, it's 3 different ways, and we're just going to run through that quickly. So one of the really good things about RStudio is its ability to work with project files. So this sort of links with this links with us keeping our files sort of in a sensible places on our computer for us to work with. And too many times I look and see people's computers and it's just a mess of files all over the place. So I think it's hugely important and really good practice for you to when you work on a project, to set up a separate folder for each project and put all the files you want for that project in there. So put your data in there, put your R scripts, put outputs of figures or whatever you've created, even put your Word document there, whatever you're writing on. Just put it all in one place so that you can find it again easily, and you will want to go back through and borrow stuff from your R scripts that you've done before and use them in future. And future you will be very happy with present you if you've been nice and neat and tidy throughout. So I'd recommend, for the very first thing we do, is somewhere sensible on your computer. So I've loaded up RStudio here, and I'm currently in my home directory on my Mac. And you've a huge choice here what to do. So I've actually got a folder full of, in my documents folder, I've actually got a folder of projects where I can put things, but it doesn't really matter as long as you keep your computer tidy. So what I'm going to do for this purposes now is just make a new folder here, and I'm just going to call this something sensible. So this is so I'm going to just call it our podcast examples. You can call it whatever you want so that you remember what it is. So in our podcast examples, inside there I might just create another folder then again, so keep everything again really nice and neat and tidy. So this is going to be intro to scripts or something. So there's another folder there. And now what I'd like to do is, so this just lets us down here in this files panel navigate through those folders. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go up here and I'm going to choose File, New Project. So we've got a choice now. We can create a project, we can create it into a new directory, we can make it into an existing directory, and this version control is the third option that I'm not going to go through at least now. We might leave that for much later in the podcast series if I get there. So I've already created a directory, so I'm going to choose existing directory here, and I'm going to just browse and find that. So that's in my home directory, and again I've put it somewhere sensible, so it's in our podcast examples, intro to scripts. I'm going to open that. I'm going to create a project. So you have a choice now. So at the minute, if we look up here, we'll see that there's project none. So we haven't loaded a project. We've just loaded up RStudio bare with no project at all. If we were working on one project here and we wanted to create this project and open up a whole new panel of RStudio, a whole new window and everything, we could check this button here, open new session. But I'm quite happy to just load it up into this current window here. So let's just leave that blank for now. So we're going to create a project in here in intro to scripts, and I've even spelt that wrong. So let's go back and fix that. So go back and fix that. We check it here. Go to rename here. So intro to scripts. That's better. So we go back up here. File, new project, existing directory, browse, our podcast examples, intro to scripts, open, create project. Cool, so now we've got, so it's loaded up our project. We can see a couple of things. Up here we can see this is where we're working. This is on a Mac, is the tilde, that's my home directory. Slash in the folder our podcast examples, slash in the folder intro to scripts. And then we're working on this project. The project is called intro to scripts. And that's it there. So there's now a project file here called intro to scripts. So what's really great about that is that if I close that whole window, that RStudio window, that's another one that I've been working on there. So let me just get rid of that for you. Minimize that. So now if I go to a folder window and I open up, go to my home directory, so I can go find that. So there's my home directory there, and in there should be something called our podcast examples, and in there should be something called intro to scripts. Now I've got a project file, so if I double click on that, This is one of the really great things about RStudio and project files. So I double click on that, it's loaded up everything for me. So it's taken me automatically to that folder here. So this window here now is taking me to this directory here. And actually, as far as R is concerned, we're now actually working in this directory. So this, at the moment, this is its default directory where R is going to look for files, it's going to save things. And that will make things much, much easier. We'll see in a few minutes and later on in the series when we start working with data sets. So at the moment our project is blank. We've got nothing in there except in our project. And what we might want to do then is create some new files. We're actually going to start working with script files. We're not going to be typing into the console window anymore very much. We're instead going to be typing our commands into a script file, which is basically just a text file that stores the commands. But they're special text files with special extensions that do different things. But ultimately what they do is they send information from the script over here to the console window where it's evaluated. Now, I'm not saying we never type into the console. We will type in, the console is a great place maybe to test out a line of code or try something, or if you just want to do something really quick. But any of your actual work, any of the steps involved in analyzing data or running a model or something, you want to have those steps saved in a script file or equivalent over here. So let's make one of those. We've got choices. So if we go up here to the file, new file, we've now got a choice, and the first option is the R script file, which I'll show you now in a moment. The next one is an R notebook, which I'll show you later on in this podcast, and then there are this Rmarkdown as well. So actually we'll start with Rmarkdown because that's what those files, those HTML files you've been looking at, are built in R notebook, and I'll show you it's easier to go from R notebook to R script than the other way around. So I'm going to select here an R Markdown file to start with because this is what we've used to make all those HTML files, those mixtures of code and instructions that you've been working with through this, that go hand in hand with this podcast series. That's what I use to make those. So we'll work with these first because it's easier to go from R Markdown to R script, and then the notebook is just a little tweak on a version on the same thing. So we go for an R Markdown file, and it pops up a range of options here. So we're going to make a document. You can actually, what's cool is you can make presentations with this as well. So you can actually make like PowerPoint style presentations. They're a little bit more like the LaTeX Beamer actually, but they're a really neat way of making presentations using R and R Markdown. You can make shiny apps. These are interactive little apps. You can play with those. Those are really cool for deploying on the web. They let you add sliders and click buttons to graphics and let users do some data analysis on the fly. There's templates, there's other options, but we're going to stick with documents, and we're going to give this a title. So I'm going to call this My First R Markdown. You put your own name in there, whatever you want, and then you've got an output format option. So you can output to HTML, that works really well. You can output to PDF, that can work really well, but you need to have tech installed. So that's a whole can of worms that I'm not going to get into here. So that's like LaTeX style. You can output to Word, which in my experience doesn't really work all that well, so I tend to leave things as HTML. It just works far better for me. Seems the most seamless way of doing it, and plus I just quite like the way the HTML documents look, and they're easier, I think, to share among people. For example, if you're working on a laptop, the HTML will scale the file to your screen. So if you're on a small laptop or a big computer, it'll scale it, whereas the PDF, you're kind of just stuck with that resolution and the size and structure and layout. So that's it. So we've got our title, author, HTML output. Just check OK, and that creates this file. So it's created this file. It's named it untitled1, so that's a bit unhelpful. It's given it a title there that we just typed in, and the date, etc., and it said output HTML document. So it's built this header here. So this header is called a YAML, Y-A-M-L header, and that has been created from the information we just put in there. And this is what controls what sort of the output style of the document is. We don't have to worry too much about that, but so let's change this though for now. So this is untitled1. Let's save it as something more sensible. So we'll save that as My First R Markdown file. Call it script, will we? So My First R Markdown script. We'll save it. So that's it. So what we've got here is we've got a file that's kind of a mixture of our code and a mixture of text. And this I've showed you already. So between these three sort of hyphens here, this is the header, the YAML header, that controls the sort of document properties, its general name, the date, etc., and what type of output it's going to go to. If I wrote PDF there. If I change that to PDF, it would output to PDF instead, but let's leave that as HTML. And then what we've got is, first up, we've got these three little prime symbols. So you've got to be careful with that. These are not apostrophes. These are the prime symbol. So you'll have to find that exactly on your computer, on your own laptops. They move all around on different keyboards in my experience. Mine on my UK, Ireland keyboard has it down, on my Mac has it down beside the Z key, all on its own there. So that's the prime symbols. You need three of those, and then these curly brackets here, and then this R here tells it that the code it expects in here is R. So what's cool about RStudio and these other IDEs, these integrated development environments, is they can work with loads of different computer languages like Python, like C, like Fortran, whatever. But this tells it that it's expecting R code. So these three dots, these three prime symbols here show that whatever is contained in here is code, computer code, and then this letter here this first word or letter tells us what language it's expecting, so it's R. This is the name of what's called this chunk, so this is a chunk of code here. This chunk is being called setup, that's an internal name. And then the include equals false option means that when this file is built, it doesn't include this in the file. So it runs the code silently in the background. We can see it here, but we'll see in a moment when we make the file, when we knit this file together, it will compile and make a file, but it will leave this out. And essentially what's this doing? This lets you here set sort of the global options for all the chunks that will follow. So here the knitter options for the chunk are set to echo true. So that echo just means copy all the chunk. By default it will echo the code into the file that's made and it'll show it to us there. So it'll both evaluate and echo the code. There's loads of different options. We don't have to worry too much about that now. Then we've got a bit of what's called Markdown text here. So this is not computer code, this is text. This double hash symbol here means this is a header 2. So what will happen is this title will be created with header 1 style, so that'll be big bold font. Then double hash is header 2 style, so then we get it'll print that as Markdown. This is some code here, so it says this is an Rmarkdown document. Markdown is a simple formatting syntax for authoring HTML etc. documents. For more details, you can Google it here, and there's loads. You can follow this URL. There's loads of information online to help you with this. And it says when you click the knit button, a document will be generated that includes both content as well as the output of any embedded R code chunks within the document. And you can embed R code chunk like this. So here's a chunk of R code. So here's an actual chunk. So it's a 3 prime symbol. It's R language. And then this chunk has been called cars, and what it's going to do is there's a data set built into R called cars. If I come over here and just type cars, that's a data set there. It's a series of speeds and distances for different cars. Very simple standard data set that we use a lot. And it's going to type summary of cars. So summary of cars would be something like this. This is a sort of output we would expect, the means and medians and max and mins of the speeds and distances. That's what that's doing. So before we go any further, let's just do this. So when you click the knit button, and you can see here, look, this knit is written with these stylings here, so we can see what that does in a moment. So we click the knit button, the document will appear. So the knit button is up here. So let's just save that. So it's red at the moment with a little star, so let's save that. Now it's gone black and the star is gone. So let's press knit and see what happens. Press knit, come over here, the little Rmarkdown tab pops up, comes forward. Our Markdown tab comes forward, shows us what it's done. So it says it's processing the file. So it's processing my first Rmarkdown script. It's running all the chunks. You see here, it ran the setup chunk. Then it ran some ordinary text without R code. Then it ran the chunk labeled cars. Did some more text. Then it ran the chunk labeled pressure with some options specified. Those are echo false. We can look at that in a moment. And then some more ordinary text without R code, some details about where it built the temporary files, and then it said output file created, my first Rmarkdown script.html. So it's built a HTML file. And we pop down here then to the viewer pane, and we can see it built it. So it's built this nice looking document here. So it's called it my first Markdown in big bold font. So that's come from the title option here in the YAML header. It's written the author's name here. It's pulled that from the YAML header as well, and it's stuck the date on it as well, also pulled from the YAML. The output HTML is a silent sort of option that's told it to spit out this HTML file, and then we move on. And the next thing is there's a chunk here. It doesn't appear in the file, and that's because the include option was set to false. Then we come down and we've got a double hash. We've got a header2 style here for Rmarkdown, and that's what header2 looks like. So we've got a nice header here for Rmarkdown, and it then prints for us very nicely, I think, the text that we typed in, the actual sort of English text explaining what we're doing. So this is an Rmarkdown document exactly as we saw over here, and it's got a URL that you can follow. If you click on that, that'll open up your browser or whatever. So if you want, you can view this file here in your viewer, or if you click this button here, it'll pop it up in actually a new window. So it'll pop it out into here, your browser. This is my Safari browser, and it'll pop it out there for us to look at. We'll go back to RStudio. So here we are in RStudio again. So you'll see this knit here is written in bold. That's because it's got these two asterisks either side of it. So that's indicating the bold font. If there was just one asterisk either side, you'd get an italics font or typeface. And then what have we got next? We come down, and then what's come next is the R code chunk has been included now in this. So now we've got include is true. It's defaulted to true. So we haven't specified include is true, but that's the default option, so it's true. So it includes this chunk. This chunk has appeared in our code in this grayed out box. So this is our code, the raw R code that was evaluated. And then underneath it is what the output of that evaluation. So underneath that is the summary of cars. And that's what we can see. We ran it a little minute ago in our console. So that's exactly this here. It's been printed to screen and embedded in the HTML document. We then come down and we can include, the next thing is a header of including plots. That's it here. This again, double hash header2. You can triple hash for header3 style as well. And it says you can also embed plots, for example. And here we've got again a chunk. This chunk is again our code. It's called pressure. The name of this chunk is pressure, and its echo is false. So it's not going to echo this bit of code into it there. So it's just, you can also embed plots, for example, and then it's not going to embed the code for it, but it's going to just produce and embed the output of that code. So I'm actually going to go back and change that to echo true, because I think people might want to see that. And then so we've got that, and then it's put a note saying note that the echo set to false was added to the chunk. I'm going to change that again. So note that the echo false parameter could be added to the code chunk to prevent printing. Okay, so I've changed it to echo true. Let's knit that again. And now it's produced exactly the same thing, except now it's shown us the code that was used to plot the pressure. Okay, so pressure is another data set actually that's embedded in R. So we can go up here, pressure looks like this. So pressure is another data set of temperature again, of temperature and pressure. And then when we've plotted that, it's just defaulted and plot pressure on the y-axis and temperature on the x-axis. That's what it's done there. So that's basically that. I mean, that's how we do Markdown. So if we wanted to add another, say we wanted to add our own chunk in. So what I would say is here we might want to let's try something. Let's just try a header3. Let's like an alternative line plot. Let's do something slightly different. So I'm going to add a chunk here. So we've got a couple of options to add a chunk in our chunk. We could copy and paste this and then change it. We could go up here to insert an R chunk here, or a bash chunk, or a Python chunk, or an RCPP chunk. We don't have to worry about these. We can insert an R chunk if we want. There's also a shortcut which is on the Mac is Command Options I. So that does that. Command Options I just return that blank chunk. But let's just do for the sake of this, and we'll insert a new R chunk here. So we're going to insert an R chunk here. I'm going to call this something like line plot. And then we're going to again just plot pressure just like before, and I'm going to go for type equals, I'm going to go for both actually. So let's go for both. So this will be a line and a point plot all together. So we save that again. Now we just knit this. So an alternative line plot. And what's great here is this is a really good way to document your code. So what's nice about Markdown, our Markdown files, is that you get to keep notes essentially you know, it's always good to put comment in. We'll see commenting is important in a minute as well within your R code, but it's also really useful is to actually sort of put some explanatory notes or context to some analysis that you've done, and this makes sharing essentially the work that you've done really easy, because you can now, if you do a big analysis and you want to share this with, I don't know, a colleague, a collaborator, a supervisor, whoever, you can write a document like this and you can send them then this Rmarkdown file, you can send them the HTML file, and you can send them the data, and then they can recreate and rerun your analysis. And if you've explained yourself very well in your sort of notes here, they should be able to follow exactly what you've done, and if they want, look for mistakes or errors or learn from you as to how you've done it. And this learning from people is really important. So you're going to be learning from yourself as well as learning from the code we're going to give you over the whole course of this series. But you're always, I find, going to be going back and borrowing. You'll have learned to do something at some point in the past, and then in the future you're going to need it again. You don't want to reinvent the wheel. So what you'll do is you'll go back and try to find the file in which you did that and copy and paste it out of it. And one way that's made much easier for yourself is if you've kept good notes. And essentially this notebook, this sort of keeping notes like this is more similar in a way to the way people working in laboratories and in the field would take field notebooks and laboratory notebooks of what they did in step by step so that they can then recreate and troubleshoot and fix problems when they arise and share that information with other people. So anyway, back to this. So I'm going to put some notes in. So here we will recreate this scatter. Alright, so here we will recreate this scatter plot, but with lines and points to illustrate better the trend in the data. So that's notes for ourselves, but also I think my advice would be for every line of R code that you ever write here, so this is a command, for every line of R code that you write, you should write one line of comments at least. That would be my advice. So here we plot the pressure data set, which will be temperature on the x-axis and pressure on the y-axis, and we add the points. Okay, so there's 3 lines of code actually. So one of the things you'll notice is I added some carriage returns here. So best practice is when you're writing code is don't let your code go past this column. You see this thin gray line here. Don't let your code go past this. I think it's possibly at position 78 or 80. Depends what I've set it at. But don't let your R code go out past that. Otherwise, it'll end up when we build our HTML files, it'll end up going off the line and making our HTML. We'll have to scroll horizontally on our HTML. We don't have to worry about that for. We don't have to worry about that for the text though, because the text will automatically be wrapped. So the text here can go over the line and go past this, the raw text, and then when the HTML is built, it will automatically resize that down accordingly. So there's 3 lines of comment for 1 line of code. Hopefully then that means if I come back sometime I'll be able to know why I added the type equals B. So it's very explicit. Right, so let's save that and then let's knit that. Right, so we've got exactly the same thing, and now it's added that code in there for us to see, and it's drawn this nice pressure plot, which is pressure against temperature, and it's got both. So it's got these point circles again, and it's got little lines connecting them just to help us illustrate that trend a little bit better, perhaps. Right, so that's our Markdown file. So our Markdown is a mix of Markdown, and Markdown is it's a markup language that takes raw text like this with some patterns in it. So patterns like or instructions like these asterisks here help you will render when you render or knit the thing, it'll see this and interpret this as bold font in here, whatever's in the middle. This actually here, and I didn't mention this before, so this is some inline code. So this is some inline, it's not a chunk as such that it's evaluated, but when you use the prime symbols like this in the normal text, you come over here then and you'll see that it shows you that it's code, and it shows it in a different typeface. So it's done it in like a sans serif fixed width courier style typeface, and it's also then grayed out the background so that it's clear that note that the echo equals false. So this is code. We know that's code, some sort of either real R code or pseudocode. So that's pretty cool. And there's lots more options to Markdown as well. So if you Google Markdown, there's loads of tutorials out there that'll show you how to make like italics, how to make bold and italics, how to make lists, or ordered lists and unordered lists. There's loads of extra stuff that you can do with it to lay it out. You can add URLs, you can add all sorts of stuff to it to embellish and make your documents even prettier and nicer and more informative and helpful for users. But we're going to kind of leave that. I'm going to leave the Markdown files here for now, because I'm going to now go on and show you about a basic R script instead. So, like I said, there's different ways of working, and there's no real ideal one way over another. These Markdown things are relatively new. Newer still are the notebooks. I'll show you those again at the end of this podcast. But where it started was just with an R script file. So we could have just written an R script file from the beginning and not bothered with this Markdown. What I'm going to do is I'm going to be a little bit clever about this and use a function called Perl in the knitter package to extract the R code from this and dump it into a script or a file for us. So this is a little bit of extra code here. So this is the knitter package. So it's in the knitter package. I'm not going to load the whole knitter package because I don't need to load it all up. So knitter, this P here, this purple symbol in the P says it indicates that knitter is a package. So it's a general purpose tool for dynamic report generation. In that I know, so inside that we use this double colon thing to say inside that there's a function I know called Perl, and that's going to output for me. So it's going to take my first Markdown script.rmd. It's going to output that to my first R script.r. So it's going to output it to, so it's going to extract the R code out of that, and at documentation level equals 1. So I'm going to go for documentation level. There's different options there, but I'm going to go for that. So hopefully what that's done is you see it ran, it processed the file, and its output, and it's created a file called myfirsrscript.r, and you can see here in our folder structure it's appeared. So if I click on that, what it's basically done is it's stripped out the R code from this Markdown file. So now this is just a basic .r script. It doesn't have the Markdown thing. It's not going to produce a nice HTML document at the end, but it will do exactly the same thing. So if I Control A or Command A in this and then hit return, or if I run it, so if I click this button up here, run the liner selection, so if I select all that and hit run, and there's the shortcut options, and the Mac that's Command return, and Windows I think it's Command R or Control R, I can't quite remember, but if you hover over it you'll see what the options are. So if I run all that script, you'll see it's basically just taken all this script line here and it's sent it over to the console to evaluate it, where it's done exactly the same thing. So it's created our plots here for us, it's output the summary here to the console window, and it's created the plots for us in the plot pane, and we can cycle back through those. So that's the first plot that we made. There's the nice, maybe slightly nicer one with the lines and the points on it together. You can cycle back and forth between them. So that's created these here. So it hasn't made a HTML file, but it has done exactly the same work. Sometimes I work with scripts like this. More and more I'm starting to work with Markdown files to help me keep better notes of what I'm doing and to share my documents with people, like sharing for these lectures. But many times I'll still just write a basic script when it's just for me or I'm just working in R. So it's kind of your choice what you want to do. So whereas there is a bit of a difference, whereas this has actually taken this information and sent it to the console. When you have an R Markdown file like this and you knit it, it doesn't actually send it to the console here. It kind of does it privately in a private session of R, and it creates the file and then shows it to you at the end. You can run the chunks one by one as well, though. So if we go back to our Markdown file here and we highlight a chunk, this little arrow here will run the current chunk, and it will actually, basically that arrow is literally taking this and sending it over here to the console window and running it. We'll come down here and run the next one, come in here and run the next one, and that's essentially doing then exactly the same thing as an R script file is doing, which is doing it from an R Markdown. So in many ways, I think the R Markdowns are superior for that reason, and I would encourage you to. Yeah, it's your choice. You can, if you go for a script file, just make sure you write lots and lots of comment here behind this hash symbol. If you're working in the R Markdown, it lets you do both. You're going to have to, I think, write the sort of explanation of the line of code, and then also the sort of the reasoning or interpretation for what it is you're doing for somebody who's reading it in basic Markdown language here. So that's kind of the basics of it. The other type of output file I said was a notebook file. So if we go to File, New File, R Notebook, we get something that looks very similar. So this is very similar to this. And the only difference actually really is, there's a couple of differences in the YAML header, but realistically it'll work the same, and I'll show you in a moment. The only difference really is that the output here is HTML notebook, not HTML document. So actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all of that file, because I'd like it to be almost identical to what we've just done. And I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to paste it over all of this here. I just copied and pasted that now. I'm going to change it. So this is not an R notebook, and that's now R Markdown. This is my first R notebook, and I don't want a HTML document. I want a HTML notebook, and now I'm going to save that. I'm going to save that as my first R notebook script. So let's just check here in the file. So we've got my first R Markdown script that we made. We've got the HTML that was built from that. We also then, remember, we used the knitter Perl command to extract and create the R script here. You might have just built that yourself, though normally you wouldn't extract it. I was just doing that to show you that it matches exactly. And then we've created as well my first R notebook script.rmd. So it's also a .rmd file, same as the Markdown, but the difference is it outputs to a notebook here, like this. And then it's also got a my first R. It has automatically then, without us even knitting or anything, it's created a my first R notebook script.nb.html. So it's a .notebook HTML. So it's not a straight up HTML. It's a special kind of HTML. It's a notebook HTML. So to all intents and purposes, it's identical. The only difference is the title is different and the output style is different. And what you'll see here is we've lost the knit button. The knit button that was here on the Markdown file, it was a knit, has now become a preview button. And it's become preview there because it's seen this help notebook thing. And essentially what it is that these notebooks are sort of more dynamic versions of a flat Markdown file. So the Markdown is flat. It doesn't do anything until it doesn't do anything with it until we hit the knit button, and it just takes this whole thing and it knits it and turns it into a flat HTML file that we can then load and share with people. Whereas this notebook RMD is slightly more just dynamic. So let's see what's going on. So we'll hit preview. When we hit preview, we'll see here it's created this it's created this almost identical file. So it's almost absolutely identical to the R Markdown one. The only difference really is that we've got this option here for hide, show and hide all code. So we can hide all code. Zip, gone. All the code, all the code and the R stuff is gone, and we can show all the code. So it's showing the code here. But at the moment, there's no output from the code, and that's because the actual chunks haven't been evaluated. It hasn't evaluated the chunks yet. So it's hiding and showing the code, but our graphs are missing, basically, our figures are missing. So what we need to do here then is we need to run our chunks. So again, you can run them one by one if we want. So we'll run that one by one. You see, press the green arrow, press this green arrow here. Now what it's done is, this is different. It's done two things. It's taken this, it's evaluated in the console, and we can see the output in the console over here on this side. But also, it's shown a preview of that output here. So it's flashed up the preview of it over here in the file for us to see, in the Rmarkdown file for us to see. We do the same here. You hit that, and again, it's run the plot pressure, so it's generated, it's evaluates the plot pressure, and it's showing us the plot here now. It's not put it into the, it's not though put it into the plot pane. It's kept it over here, and it's showing us the preview of it here in this portion over on the Markdown, hovering over. And again, you can imagine this will do exactly the same thing. So there it goes. And as we've done that, now we've got our graphs there now. You'll see if we save this now, so the moment I just saved that, so Command S, or if you want to hit the save button, now that it's saved it, now if we go over here, the HTML file is dynamically sort of updated and changed so that it's now showing not only the code, but it's also showing the output. So the summary output that's here, the plots that are there have just appeared. And again, you can sort of hide those chunks of code one by one. So now you can share a document with people, and if the person you're sharing with doesn't care about R and doesn't care about the code, they can hide that, and they don't have to worry about looking at it. They can just look at your graphs and read the interpretation and read what you've done in the language you've written it here. Or if they really want to see, well, how have they actually made that, they can click the code button, and now they can see, they built that with plot pressure type equals B. So that's really, I think that's really quite cool feature of these notebooks. But you have to just bear in mind that stuff that you're working on here will update live. You just have to be careful that you're actually working where you think you're working, and you're not working in the console window. You need to just kind of work here all the time. So if we came back and just did something like, if we came back and added that to color equals red, it's not going to do anything yet. But if I save that, again, nothing has changed, and that's because it hasn't actually rerun this chunk. We'd have to rerun that chunk again. So if we rerun that chunk, now it's red here. It's still black over here, and that's because we haven't saved our file. As soon as I save that file, either with this button here or by Command S, so I hit that button, now it's saved it, and now the HTML file is updated and changed. So you just have to bear in mind, if you're working with these notebooks, they're really cool in this way. You get to kind of see, you as a developer or a writer of the code get to see what you're doing here live in this one file. But then when you share it with somebody, you have to remember that at the end of it, you need to rerun the chunks and then rebuild the HTML. So the best kind of practice to do at the end of a notebook then, the best thing to do would be maybe to come here, check this little down arrow, go to run all again. So let's run all, and there's a shortcut there if you want it. Run all the chunks, rerun them all. It's gone red again here. Hit save, and now you know that you've rerun all your chunks again, and now your output file here is up to date and live. And again, you can knit that as well. So you can knit to a flat HTML, you can knit to PDF here. If you choose this little arrow here, you can get access to these different options if you really want. So that's basically it. That's the 3 different types of scripts that you might work with. As I said, this script file thing is kind of how we would have done it in years gone by, and is still how I would do it a lot of times myself, probably out of familiarity more than anything. But for sharing stuff, I think either Rmarkdown like this, where you write a sort of a flat Rmarkdown file and create a flat HTML file, is a way to do it. What's nice here is you get this combination of actual verbiage and words to describe what you're doing, as well as R code. But again, I would encourage you, I haven't done it here for all of it, but for every line of R code you write at least one line of comment, as I've done down here. So I would encourage you to write something here so that you know what you've done, both here in the Markdown, but also here in the R code. Then finally, I suppose the big bells and whistle one is these newer notebooks, which again are great, just a slightly different workflow compared to the flat Rmarkdown files. And ultimately, it's up to you. You can create these very easily. Again, just to remind you, if you go up here to File, New File, you can create a new script, a new R notebook, and a new Rmarkdown. And there's other options here as well if you want to start playing around and messing. So that's it. That's kind of basic. So the take home from this is, please, please, please keep a tidy computer. Please don't have files all over the place. Please, for every analysis that you do, separate analysis, create a new folder somewhere and put that new folder somewhere sensible. Don't just dump it in your downloads folder or something like that. Put them somewhere sensible. So I've got now, for this example, I've created a folder in my home directory called R Podcast Examples. Then in that, I would fill this full of different folders for each of the different analyses that you'd work through and work on. And then into that, so when you've got a folder that you want to work on for a project, create a project file. So create an R project file again, that's under File, New Project. So create a project somewhere to work on, and into that project then lets you double click that on your computer. It will load up R Studio and it'll put the working directory here. So this is where it will look for files to read in, and this is where it will by default save files out to. And then, you're going to, later on, very soon, we're going to start having data sets. We're going to have data files that we're going to read in. That's going to live in this folder as well. But then one of the first things you're going to do is create some sort of file, script file, and it's your choice. You can work with a flat script file, an Rmarkdown script, or an Rnotebook script, and the choice ultimately is yours. The lecture notes that you're working with for this are currently at least built as flat Rmarkdowns, as HTML document outputs. But I could, if I want, go back and just change that very quickly to HTML notebooks just by changing HTML document here to HTML notebook, and then they would magically just stop being flat markdowns and they would become these more dynamic R notebooks. Yeah, so that's it. We'll pick this up again when we start working with scripts in a bit more detail and start reading in data, start actually doing some statistics.